So in the last tutorial, we saw how to actually implement an API using Node.js. And what we did was implemented a simple API that could do CRUD operations. CRUD is nothing but operations that we do using HTTP methods. Methods like get, post, delete, put, patch. These are the most commonly used methods. If you want to revise, you can go back to my previous video and you can have a go at these things. After that, we can do CRUD operations, which are relevant for creating. C stands for create, R stands for read, uh, U stands for update, and D stands for delete. So these are the set of operations that we do. And before I start with API testing, because this tutorial is mostly about how we are going to test an API that is already implemented, or maybe an API that you are creating, you are working on. So we will learn how to use tools like Postman and how you can like find if there are any errors in your API. Cool. So before that, I just want to discuss that CRUD operations are something that lets us communicate between client side and server side. Client side sends a request, and the server side processes that request and produces the relevant response for that. So if you want to actually go in depth, you can go back to my previous video. I will highly recommend that. And once you are set with that, we can continue with this session. And let's firstly, before starting, let's have a look at the agenda that we are going to follow. So firstly, we will have a look at APIs. Then we will study status codes. Status codes are nothing but a number, a three-digit number that is sent back along with the response. This was something that I missed to discuss in the previous video, so we will do that in this tutorial itself. Then we will have a overview of headers in HTTP requests, and actually we will see these through Postman itself. We won't go into much detail because I have already demonstrated headers in a browser environment. You can go into inspect tools and you can check out the network section to inspect the headers which are being generated for every request and associated response. All right. Then we will have a look at Postman. Then we will see how to make a request using Postman. We will study how to study the responses that we get from the API using Postman. Then we will study about collections, how we can create collections. Then we will move on to benefits or merits of Postman that are like Teamspaces, which allows us to collaboratively work on an API. Then we will discuss the environment that is provided by Postman so that we do not have to change everything everywhere if it is repetitive in the entire state. All right. And then we will just discuss some other things that I have in mind, and then we will close out this session. So if that is cleared, we will move on to the first thing that is going to be overview of APIs. So let's just begin. I hope you will enjoy learning through this tutorial. So for an overview, we have some statements that are present over here. We have some imagery. We will have a go at all of these. Let's take this step by step. So APIs are set of rules and protocols that allow different software applications to communicate and interact with one another. So basically, if we require some kind of data, if we know we want to build a software and we want dynamic data, we want data associated with some user, some manufacturer, or some entities that are associated with our business logic, then we need to think of an API, a database management system, something that is going to look after that data, right? And that is going to provide us that data. So API is such software that works on a server end and it runs accepting requests from client end and gives response which are data requested by the client itself, right? So that is actually what happens in the first point. Then we have another point mentioning that APIs act as an intermediary, allowing one piece of software to access the functionality or data of another software system, right? So we can have a client device and it can interact with an backend system bit- through a medium, which is going to be API. All right. So APIs gives endpoints that we can hit to get some sort of results, right? So if you are a client, you are going to make a request to this API. This API will do the processing at the backend and it will collect all the data that is requested or needed for the response. And then it will, as a mediary, it will send you back that response itself. Cool. Then the third point discusses that it is crucial to actually test out APIs because if you just develop the APIs and if you put that into production and if there is any errors that were undiscussed, unresolved in the API itself, it will show on the production, right? So it might break your system while it is in production mode. So you would not want a system to collapse when it is in production. So it is very much crucial that we test our APIs. Okay? So that was all the points that were in this slide itself. Hopefully that gave you a glimpse of API. I already did a video on how to develop an API and we discussed CRUD operations in that video. So check that out if you have missed that. And you can see there is a GIF image that is running constantly over here. So right now this is the device, this is the client device, and there is somebody who is putting an API into the client device, and that is actually providing us the data that we want to see on the screen, right? So imagine this to be a Spotify application. So Spotify integrates its API into the client device, uh, its client software that interacts with the backend system and brings together all the data that would be required to run Spotify. Right? So that is the idea behind this. And this will cover mostly the overview of APIs. If you have anything else, if you want to maybe learn this and deep uh, thoroughly, you can go to Google. You can try to query Google for different definitions of API. This was the best explanation that I could come up with. Let's just continue now. So the next slide is about status codes. Like I mentioned, I forgot to actually cover this properly in the previous tutorial. So we will do this in this tutorial itself. So HTTP status codes are three-digit numbers. All right. And these are returned by the server to indicate the outcome of an HTTP request. All right. So, like I said, whenever you make a request from a client device, it is going to come to an API. The API will interact with the backend system. It will configure all the response that are relevant and it will bundle that together with a package that is also going to contain something known as status code. All right. So that package, when it is sent back, the response that is sent back, it will have a status code attached to it, and it will be like 200 for an response that is of OK type, like it resolved properly. So it is a good, like a good response. Then 404 means not found. If you requested for some data and the server was unable to find that, then it will say the status code will be 404 for that. Then 500 means internal server error. So basically, if your server runs into some error while processing a request, then the status code that needs to be sent back from the server side is 500. All right. Now we have understood status codes. We will also see this in action when we are working on Postman. But what is the significance, right? So basically, this allows us to know or identify issues in an API itself. All right. So if we are testing an API, we can study the status code and we can right off the bat say this was a successful request, or we can say this was an unsuccessful request, right? So status codes help us to identify the types of response and whether it was resolved properly or it ran into an error. All right. Also, it helps in diagnosing problems. Basically, while you're creating an API, a backend system, you make various validation checks, right? So based on the validation checks, you send back a response. So if there is some bad request made by the client itself, it will check for certain data validation, and if that validation doesn't pass, then it will throw an error and it will generate 400 error that will just be a bad request, right? So based on the communication, based on the state being managed between the two ends, the client and the server, right? Uh, the status codes will change and it will allow us to diagnose what an actual problem is behind the scenes, right? So it allows, if we know what the problem is, it allows us to quickly resolve that as well. And if you really want to learn about status codes, I have a link attached to this PPT itself. I will link this into the description. And if you go into this, it will discuss all the status codes that we can find, right? So it says key 100 to 199 are the numbers reserved for informational types of responses, right? So if a response is of an information type, then it is going to have some any status code in this range. Otherwise, if it is of a successful response, then it is going to have a status code of 200 to 299. Then redirection messages will have the status codes. Client error will have these status codes, and server side errors will have this range of status codes. So you can actually scroll down and actually have a look at all the relevant status codes that actually come come in handy while you are developing an API or while you are testing an API. So this document will help you majorly to overcome your doubts with status code. So let's close this out now. If you want to learn, you can go to this link and you will find this PPT uh, in the description of the video. Then let's continue now. So HTTP headers. Finally, we came back to HTTP headers. We won't cover this in browser's perspective, but we will cover this in Postman. We will see how headers work in Postman. And let's just cover these points. That should be fine enough for this tutorial. HTTP headers provide additional information about the request or response. So HTTP headers are nothing but some information that is attached with every request and every response that are being translated between client and server. Right? So you can visualize this to be the data that is printed on front of a letter that you post to somebody else, right? So it needs to have the address of the person, it needs to know the name of the person, or various details that you want to go with the letter, right? So headers are something like that that get attached to a request and also an response, and it allows a seamless connection between a client and a server. If that is cleared, let's move to the next point that discusses about the information related to authentication or data being translated between client and server. So HTTP headers are quite comprehensive. It have metadatas about many things. Uh, we do not need to cover everything in detail, but if you have some kind of authentication going on, some kind of session management, the tokens or the access tokens that actually help us to manage a session. These are maintained inside of HTTP headers. So that is the relevance of HTTP headers, and that is why it is required to know how HTTP headers work actually. Then correctly configuring headers are essential to ensure the request is uninterrupted and processed as intended. Right? So configuring a right header is crucial for a seamless communication between client and server. Uh, by mistake, I have written interrupted over here. It has to be uninterrupted. So do mind that. Now we will move on to the real deal of this tutorial itself. That is going to be Postman. And when I'm done with this slide, we will go to Postman actually, and we will try to study the architecture, the design, or the layout of Postman. Okay? So firstly, let's cover these points. The first point discusses that Postman is a comprehensive tool that simplifies API testing, providing features like request builder, scripting capabilities, and more. So Postman is quite comprehensive. It has a lot of features to give you, like serve you, but we will just look at the essential parts that is going to help us to test an API. Okay. And what are the benefits of Postman? First benefit is you can create requests. So basically, it allows you to simulate requests that you would make from a browser, right? So Postman acts like a client, helping you to create a request, and that request goes to the server, and the API processes that, and based on the API that you have requested to, you will get a response, and that will be also simulated inside of Postman itself. So that is why it is a great tool to actually test the API if you do not have a front end in place, right? So not usually you have a front end already made up. Usually developers go ahead with developing the API first, then they go ahead with UI or front end development. So while you are working on API development, you can test all the APIs that you develop using Postman. Then it also allows us to write uh, testing scripts. This is just for your knowledge. We won't be covering this in the tutorial itself, but we will cover how the environment is actually managed and how it helps a tester in day-to-day life. All right. So, without wasting any more time, hopefully you have understood the basics of API. If you want to cover that, you can go back to my previous tutorial that was about API development. And if any theory that you have not gained confidence over for Postman, you will actually see these things in practice so you can understand while we are at it. Okay. Now we will transition quickly into Postman and we will see how the layout actually works. So this is my Postman. I have actually zoomed in a little bit just for the view to be clear while I record. Then let's see, right? So this is an application that I have downloaded over the internet. This lets us to work with Postman, right? So you can find this on, let's say, I can go to a Edge browser. I can just search for Postman installation, and it will give you a link right off the bat that you can use to download the Postman for your device, right? So I already have that in place, so I will not get into it. But once you have the installation completed and you have ran the setup file, it will give you such a software that you can find inside of like Windows or like all the applications wherever you have installed, right? So you can search for Postman. It will allow you to run this application. So let's go back to Postman. Let's see the structure of Postman and let's see how it can help us to test an API. Right. So it has some navigations up top. This is the home itself, I think so. I'm in my workspace. I can see whatever workspace that I have. So right now I will just utilize this workspace to create all the tests that I want to do. We can have the explore section actually to see which APIs are actually free for us to use. So Twitter has made its API free for use. If we click on this, this will quickly open that API for us. And this is the structure of Twitter's API. So we can see this in view, but we won't go into detail because it might end up being confusing. So we'll come back to our home and we will go to our workspace. Now this is an empty workspace. This allows us to like set up our API testing, right? So there is a concept called collections in Postman. We will study that later onwards. Uh, Firstly, we will see some simple API creations like request creation. Then we have an section for environment, then a section for history, and some configuration related to the editor itself. So basically, this is the overall layout. This is a tab that was opened up. What I can do is either I can click on this to create a new collection, or I can click on this. Basically, it will do the same thing, but I want to create a blank collection, so I will use this, and I will name this collection as dashboard. And we will see why I am naming this as dashboard quickly. And what I want to do is I want to introduce a request that I want to create, right? And I'm going to name this as a register request. All right. And now, once we have this section open up, let me just quickly uh, explain to you. So, this shows the collection that we are working with. So, it is dashboard. So, it mentions dashboard. Inside of that, I have used a register to name this request itself. So it shows that over here. Here is a drop down to select the different HTTP methods that we can work with while communicating with a server or an API. All right. So for this particular request, we will need to make an post request, and this is somewhere where you write the actual path of the API, the endpoint of an API, right? So how do we find this and what are we actually working with? So I have a VS Code opened up over here. We do not have to go into the complex parts, but what I am going to do is I'm quickly going to run this. For doing this, I will use npm run and dev. It will quickly run up my development server using NodeMon, and it is going to connect to a port, right? It mentions this port over here. So if you have worked with, if you have seen my last tutorial, you might be knowing about having a app.js file that is actually the core of your backend system. So it mentions a port that it is taking from the env, or if it is unable to find that, it is going to use 5001. That is actually being shown over here, right? So this server is actually running on this port, and we can now interact with this server using Postman itself. We do not need a browser. We can just write the path that is going to be localhost, because every time we run a development server, it is going to spin off on localhost, and we can append the different requests, right? So this is how you configure a request URL. Basically, this is the base URL of your server, all right? Now, whatever you want to do, whatever router you want to hit, because there is a concept known as routing inside of Node.js. So let's see what kind of router we have. So we will go back into app.js, and we can see over here, if you have some knowledge of routing, we are importing different routers over here, and we are implementing these routers right off the bat. So this is kind of the path that I can work with, basically, right? So this entirely is the base URL, and appending to this can be anything that I have any router that I have configured in my API. So basically, if I have developed this API, I will know where to find all the routers, what is the routing system, what is the naming convention, everything, right? So you just need to know the information, the details of the API itself, and then you are ready to test it out. Inside of the auth route, if I go into this auth routes, it will give me all the routes associated with authentication, right? So there is a router for authentication that gives me router.post. So it is accepting a post method. So rightfully we have selected the post method over here. So it should be able to find this. But over here there is another path that is mentioned to reach this function itself, right? So we need to append that over here. So basically we are doing a sign up function. So we need to do this. Now when the entire endpoint is prepared, now we can move out of this. Now we need to learn what we actually send to a server, right? So this is a post method. With a post method, we usually send data to backend systems, right? So over here we have an API running. So if we want to send some data to it, we need to go into body, then we have to select raw. There are different selections that you can make. But for my API, I'm working with JSON. So I can find that inside of this drop down and I will select JSON, right? So there are different types of requests or body that you can create for an API request. But if you know what kind of request has to be made, you can right off the bat see that I need to work with JSON because I'm working with JSON, right? So what kind of data am I expecting? So this might become quite complex for you. So do not like concentrate on this part, but I need to know what data needs to be sent from the body so that I am sure that this route has to be executed, right? So right here I'm checking, I'm making a validation check that if any of these values are not present in the request body, then I will return a 400 status code response. 400 stands for a bad request, basically saying all the inputs were not provided. So uh, let's try to simulate this request, right? So to create a JSON object, we need to open up curly braces. Now, what we need to send is email, password, name, and contact. So I'll start with name. I'll state my name as Jamal Sheikh. All right. And then I'll move to email and I will just say test. Doesn't matter. Company.com. And I can just set a password and contact. So if if I send the request without the contact and if I have a validation inside of my API or backend that wants or requires the contact, it has to be present, then it is going to throw me an error that is going to say status code as 400 that is mentioned over here. And the text is going to be same that you see over here, right? So basically, for a validation that failed, I had that validation check in my API, and it was able to throw that kind of response for my client to understand something is missing, right? So now I know that something is missing, so I can just mention my contact, right? And we can go ahead with any random number. And now the request is of valid type. So if I make a request now, it should create a me and user. All right. So it gave me something else. It gave me a 200 status code, and as you can see, there is some description about the status code right here inside of the Postman. So if you want to read that through, you can do that while you are working with Postman. And we have some response from the API. What does this read? Email registered. It says the email that you sent was registered, but it wants me to verify that email. Now, how can I simulate a verification process? I cannot do that until and unless I have this email with me, right? So this is a random email. I don't know where that email actually ended up. So I have used, if you want to see node mailer, or okay, not node mailer, send email, right? So I have sent an email to this particular email that will have the URL to actually verify this email. So to actually simulate this, we do not require this text. We will just say return me the URL and we will do it manually using Postman. So as soon as I change that inside of the API, I save the file, it will rerun my API and I can go back to Postman now. And if I make a request now, if the email has to be unique, then it will throw me an error. Let's see. Okay. Sees bad request. This email is already in use. So I cannot use this email again and again. This is some kind of validation that I have written. So if we want to look for that, email is already in use, right? So we can find that out inside of the uh, route handler. So we have discussed about route handler in our previous tutorial, so I won't get into the details. So this is how we are seeing this response inside of Postman, right? So what we need to do is we just need to change this uh, email itself. It is not letting me click, so I will manually go. And let's see. Let's hope the contact need not be unique as well. Let's see. Okay, it sees some error that is an internal server error, and it says that there is a key which is contact that is matching to another entity inside of MongoDB, right? So I'm using MongoDB for this API. So this number has to be unique. So let's change this number itself. And if I make a request now, this should create an new account for me. Okay, it did, but it did not send back the URL that I wish to have. Let's see why not. I also need to change that over here. So once I have that in place, I need to change this one more time. Sorry, I'm out of practice with this API particularly. So we'll need to debug a little while we work with this. So now I have this kind of response, right? Now it says that uh, if I go to this URL, I'll be able to verify um, my email, right? So how can I actually verify without having a front end mechanism itself? So I need to go to my API. I need to switch back to the routes that were associated with auth page, and here is the path that we need to get, right? So it is a get type of request. It requires this path that is going to end up executing this route handler. So what we are going to do is this takes the ID of the user that we created. So as I can double click on this, I can create another request and I am going to name this as verify, right? Because I am trying to verify something. And if you remember, it is going to be of get type of request, so I won't change that. I will use this. I will remove the sign up and what actually mentions this, right? So the ID is something that is going to be used inside of this route handler, right? So if I have, wait a second, so if I paste an ID, it is going to fetch a user account based on this ID, right? So if you know about, have some knowledge about MongoDB, every document that is created has a unique ID. So the document that we just created using the register method, register API, uh, it created a user for us with this particular ID. So if we want to provide that ID to the API itself, we need to place it just where it mentions colon ID, right? So this stands for user ID. Then we want to append verify, and we want to append another thing. And what that thing is actually, it is this token that we have received, right? So I will copy that quickly and we will paste that over here. And hopefully we will, when we make this request, we should get some response. Yeah. So it had some route handler. We won't get into details what that route handler is actually doing, but it was able to capture all the parameters that we sent, right? So these are path parameters because uh, these are mentioned in the actual path of the API call, right? That is why it is known as path parameters. And using this path parameters, we were able to verify the email itself. Now, once the email has been verified, now we can create a login method or a login request, right? So we'll name this as login. This is going to be a post type of method. What we require is this thing change to login at the end of the path, and it also requires a body that is going to be of type raw and a JSON object. I will do that, and it needs the email. So test4, hopefully that was it. And I'm making too many mistakes. Company.com, right? And the password was password. So if I make a request, let's see. There is a path for login that we have specified over here. There is a route handler for that. If we get inside of it, it is expecting just two data. Ignore this error. It is expecting, see, there is a validation. If any of this is missing, it will throw this 400 response that will say a bad request. If I send the right things, it will match the user that is stored inside of my MongoDB, and it will send back the object for it, right? So I was able to extract the account information with this login method. So that is how this works. Now there is something weird going on in this response. What is this token actually? So token is something that we actually create using usually commonly we use JWT, which stands for JSON Web Token. JSON Web Token helps us to maintain sessions or to establish authorization, right? So this is some token that is being generated while a person logs in. So I have a user account. I have the right credentials. I know I can verify myself. Then it verifies my account and it generates me a token that I can use for other requests that I make after logging in, and it will identify my account without me logging in again and again, right? So it gives me a pass for using different routes right off the bat. So we will actually understand this in detail. Let's just get into the PPT first. That was a glimpse at Postman. Hopefully you understood how to build a request, and now we will learn the different things like environment management. So firstly, let's transition to the next slide. And it mentions the different things that we are going to cover one by one. So first is collection. What is collection? So let's go back into Postman. Now what we are going to do is we are going to organize this a particular collection itself. So I have this empty collection that is dashboard. So I am expecting, since it is in the root of my panel, I'm expecting this to be an independent API, right? So I can have another collection. It can be another application of type Spotify clone, right? Spotify clone. Cool. So this will be distinguishable, right? So this is going to be one kind of API. This is going to be another kind of API. We do not require this. So to delete this, we use this and we confirm the deletion as we do not need it. What we are going to do is we are going to work with these collections to actually arrange our API in a very maintainable manner. What we are going to do is we are going to add a folder inside of this collection and we are going to name this folder as auth. Why did I name this as auth? If we go back to this particular thing, we have the router for managing the authentication inside of this path, right? So we can pick this keyword and we can create such folders to make the arrangement much prettier, much understood, right? And I'm going to drag and drop this particular thing, right? So this allows me to put all the API calls that I had inside of the auth router, right? So I had three routes that were associated with authentication, and I have three requests for that particular thing over here inside of my dashboard collection. Now I can have another uh, folder, and I can name that as user routes, right? Let's see how many user routes do we have. We have plenty to work with. So we are going to name this as user, and we are going to have a route. Let's say what route we need to work with. Let's say we want to work with something that is create user, right? So we already saw registration of a user, but what if there is some author, some owner of this API that wants to create user accounts from their end, right? So to have that kind of authorization, we require some JWT token or some kind of session management. So we will understand that through this particular thing itself. As you can read this route itself, it says router.post. So I'm going to name this as create. Okay. It says a post method, so I'm going to select post. Moving back, it says it requires uh, new as a path parameter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this base URL, but let me just demonstrate to you how we can actually avoid setting the base URL again and again. I can set an environment variable and I can say dashboard environment. I can say this is going to be base URL. Yeah. This is going to be default. Yeah. And it is going to be HTTP. Okay. Localhost 5000. One. Right. And we will have that same thing over here. And we will save this. So we saved this thing. Now what we can do is we set something inside of the environment. An environment is something that is shared inside of this collection. Now I have an environment that is going to work seamlessly. So I can use that environment variable using base URL, and it should pick up that environment variable from the environments. Uh, Wait a second. So if I have that as active environment, so that shows over here, right? Now the dashboard environment is active, and wherever I actually mention the base URL, whatever key that I had presented, it is going to give me this base URL. So I do not need to rewrite that. Now we can work with this URL. And if you just want to see, it will work flawlessly if we try to create another user, right? So it is going to pick that base URL from the path or from the environment itself. It is going to append that into the request path, and yeah, it is going to work out. So let's go and let's see what we need to do. Now this has to be uh, user, right? Because we saw this is of path, this path name is there, right? So we need to provide that, and we can append the path value that is inside of this route itself. And let's see what kind of values do we expect to have at the back end. So what I'm trying to do is I require certain things like name, contact, PAN, Aadhaar, these kind of values that I require. And while I have these things, then only I will be able to create an valid account, right? So for now, let's not worry about a valid account. We will just do the same thing and let's see if we are able to create an account from here. Although we should not be able to because we are not authorized to do so. Why not? Let's make a request and let's see what is going to show. I am not authorized. It says try to log in again. It says I am unauthorized. It gives me an different status code that is 401, which is for unauthorized. So I'm trying to access something that I am not authorized to access. Right? How can I like define that authenticity? How can I authorize myself? So firstly, I need to log in with something known as a dashboard account. How can I do that? I can do that with wait a second, admin dashboard.com, and the password is going to be password. And if I pull this back, so this is an account type that has a role of super admin, right? So this is some account that has authorization to access routes like these that have protect method on it, right? So protect method is something that executes as a mediator, right? Before executing the route handler itself, it is going to act as a middleware and it is going to execute and it is going to check whether a token has been sent and whether that token actually belongs to a super admin, right? So this is authorization, and that is how it is going to work. So let's have a look at this authorization function. It is going to be kind of complex. What we are going to say is uh, it checks the request headers. As I said, there is something known as headers. So if we expand this, we see different headers that are going along with the response and the request itself. So what we need to do is we need to have an authorization header. What kind of authorization header? We need to use bearer token. Why bearer token? Why did I choose to have bearer token? Because that is what I'm checking on the backend. I need to have a bearer token to actually have access to the routes that are over here, right? Whichever routes have protect method on it or a middleware protect on it, I need to have a bearer token attached to it, and the bearer token will be extracted out of the header and it will be decoded using GWT. As I explained, this is JSON Web Token. Using the GWT secret, based on some secret, it will decrypt the token, and based on that decrypted or decoded uh, token, I will extract the user. I will extract the user. I am making a MongoDB call over here and I'm extracting the user account and I'm saving it to user, right? And we will specify next. Next is a method that will basically bounce this off to the next route handler. Now we have everything in place. What do we have in place is uh, we have a login method. We logged in using admin account. I can go back to body. I can take this token and I can create an environment for this. Edit. Ah. So once I add this to the environment, all right, this is going to be accessible to my bearer token. All right. I could have done this with default, right? If I paste that over here and if I save this, it has been saved. If I make that request again, it should not do the unauthorized error. Now it is saying bad request because I did not send in all the required inputs. So let's see what are the required inputs if I'm making any validation check. Yeah. So I'm getting that over here. Yeah. So I have a validation over here. I don't know why I missed that part. So I'm checking email, name, contact, role, PAN, Aadhaar. So as an admin, I would want to create an account that has much like comprehensive data, right? So I want to know what kind of role I'm assigning to this account because I'm creating it from my end. So it is going to be an account type of maybe what kind of account types can we have? We need to go into user model. Let's see the account types. Uh, it can be either admin, super admin, or a regular user. So we are going to create a regular user, and we need to have an Aadhaar attached to it. And let's see, Aadhaar is going to be of string type, so we'll specify some random number. We'll make it 12 just so it is fair. Yeah, and we need to specify a PAN. Right. So let's go back. Let's see. Yeah, we are also expecting PAN number. So I don't know how many digits are actually inside of PAN. I'll just randomly do this. Yeah. Now let's hope this is a complete body that is expected at the API end, right? So if I send this body to the API, it says that the connection was refused. Why so? Did my API crash? Let me just check. Okay, the application has crashed because I'm using undefined on split. Okay, wait a second. Split referral is. Let me just try to have a referral in this request body. As I said, I'm out of practice with this API. I had developed this quite a long time back. So I'll just try and resolve this. And maybe spamming some random stuff will allow us to work, or maybe we need to rerun this application first since it has crashed, right? So let's wait for this to reconnect. It has connected. Let's send that request, and it says field for value this at path this for model user, right? So it was unable to find some user account associated with this referral, so it failed. So we need to have a right referral. To do is I'm going to run the client application as well, just so we are able to see uh, what is the actual link that we need to use. I will revert back the changes that I made over here, and I will save it, and I will move into client, and I will just say npm run dev. That should run my React application, and let's just see what we can actually do. So I have a test account company company.com password as password. If I log in, it allows me to. Your profile is still under survey. It says that my account is under survey and I cannot actually see. Although I was able to log in because I have verified my account, uh, but it needs to be verified. Yeah. So, like I said, there is a section for registrants, basically meaning people who have registered uh, and have not been approved, right? So to approve that, handle user approval, get an approved user. So basically, if I want to approve an user, I just need to send that uh, ID, right? So let's see how we can resolve this. Firstly, we will pick this ID because we want to approve this. What we are going to do is we are going to create another folder. This is going to be registrants. Just prints, yeah, just like how it is inside of the API. And we're going to create a request inside of it, which is going to be approve, and it is of type patch. So we will select patch. Patch is something that updates data in place. We will use base URL, and it is going to be registrants. Hopefully that is it. Or maybe we can check it. Not here, .js. Let's see. It is registrant. So we need to get rid of this S. And what we need to provide is the ID that we pegged from the account that we want to actually approve. And now, since I have the token in place, I actually do not have the token in place. So I will attach the bearer token now. If I do not attach this, no auth, it will say unauthorized. I'm unable to access this route. I cannot approve someone because I'm not an admin. Right? So I need to do this with the rights of an admin. So I will say the bearer token to be the JWT that is attached to my account, which is a super admin account. And if now I make a request, it should profile has been updated, basically meaning that now my profile is approved. If I refresh that inside of the browser, I should be able to see the links that will actually be useful for me, right? So I copied the link over here. Let's see what we need to do now. We need to create a user, right? So I will paste the referral right over here, and this should help us to actually find the user that we are that has referred to us, like who has given us the referral, and we need to make such mapping for this URL to actually work. So it is taking some time, so it should actually resolve properly. Let's just wait for it to resolve. Okay, it is taking quite some time. Okay. Could be because I have like made up these things. If there is some validation uh, for this, it would throw an error, but it should not stall like this. Maybe I have something that is broken. Actually, we are sending no response back. That is why it is stalling. So we need to set that up 200 and JSON, and we are just going to send back the user. Let's hope the next request works now. We'll go to 7. We'll up this by 7. Maybe we need to update this Aadhaar as well. To keep everything common. Let's see. Yeah. It says something has been broken. Maybe we need to use another link. If I refresh, this should say as true because it has been used, right? So I need to use another referral for this to work. So it is like I am also understanding my own work. Uh, yeah. So I have provided this thing, but is it in the right place? It is not actually. It needs to be outside. Yeah, it needs to be outside. And now if I make a request, this email is already in use. I'll have to change that up. And this as well, this as well, this as well. And let's hope for the best. It should actually resolve. Okay, yeah, as we could see this coming. We need another referral link now. We are soon going to exhaust the referrals. Hopefully this creates the user. So yeah, so this allowed us to actually create the user. I had to debug a lot of things. I made a lot of mistakes. So hopefully that was clear while I did. What I'm going to do is I'm going to finally create a new user, and hopefully we will make no mistakes on the way. And it will resolve just one particular request. Let's refresh this just to see these three referrals have been exhausted for this user account. So I can use the fourth one, and using this referral, I should be able to create a new user. And why am I able to create it? Because I'm an admin of this particular application software, and I have the authorization token, uh, which points to my account that has the role as super admin, right? So if I make that request, let's go back to body because we want to see the response. That will also show, okay, it says the contact is already in use. So I'll skip this. Uh, I wished for that to just execute, but that didn't work. But yeah, after that, we have created a user from an admin panel actually using admin's credentials. So let's go back and yeah, let's see what else can we do then. Right. So there is one a route that allows us to get me, right? Get me is a function that allows to fetch user information. Whatever GWT you have, it has information of a particular user account, right? Based on that information, we will fetch the user account from the database and we will send that back to the client itself. So let's see how that is going to work. And we are going to create a new route for that. Add a request. We are going to name that this as me. It is going to be of type get. It is going to be me. I save this. I do not need a body. Not authorized to get. Why not authorized? Because I did not send a token. I did not send set a authorization token. I have to set the authorization token whenever I want to uh, work with any route that has this protect middleware in between. Right? Now, if I send back the request, it should get me the account that is associated with this JWT token. Right? So it is the admin account, and I have the role as super admin. Yeah. So if I log in with another account being this, right? And if I take this token, which is a normal user account, and I set the token as the new one that I got, it should fetch that account for me, right? So it did that for us. I'll revert back to being the super admin because yeah, the privileges are just too good. Now I want to get all the users, so I need to be a super admin or a admin. So why am I editing over here? I'm going to create a new request, and I'm going to just say all, right? Since I have not set the bearer token, now I have set the bearer token. Once I send this request, it should fetch all the users that are actually there in the entire system. So as an admin, only I should be able to view this kind of data. So if this is someone else's token, right? If I save this, someone else's token, this is test4 at company.com ID's token, right? So it is going to say unauthorized for such request. So that is the idea behind GWT and how we can actually use tokens inside, right? And as you saw, I have already set that inside of environment. So I need not have to change this every time. I can just use the environment variable as token. And if I make the request again, it is going to resolve properly. It is going to send back the data that I want. So if I want to get a specific user, yeah, I just need to put a ID for that. So I'll create another request and see how I am going to name this. Since I'm going to fetch a specific user. I'm going to name this request as specific. The request type is going to be get, as it is mentioned over here. And we are going to use the base URL, and it requires some ID, right? So let's not make this much more difficult for us. It is already quite complex. And we want to specifically fetch the test4 account, unauthorized because I did not set the token. Yeah, when I do that and I make the request, I'll be able to fetch that, right? As an admin, I have absolute rights over all APIs. I can do anything. But a simple user who has uh, role set as user won't be able to access these privileged routes, right? So that was the idea behind authorization. Hopefully, I covered that part well and good. We won't work with any more APIs before going to the uh, application itself. Let's go into the presentation mode again. And now we have to study about team spaces. Now, team spaces is something that allows you to collaborate with other developers or testers that you have in your team, right? So to create a team space, you just need to go to your workspace. You need to switch to team spaces. Uh, it says upgrade plan. I think so. I did something horribly wrong. I'll switch back. Yeah, because this model just doesn't close on its own. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to rerun the Postman application. It takes some toll over the software, but it is going to open up just fine. Yeah, hopefully I won't see that model. Please no. Yeah, so I had to forcefully click on that. Firstly, I will just close this. I do not need this. I will close this application as well. I will terminate the client side, and now we can just concentrate on the P2P itself, what we were working with. I was going to show you collaborative team spaces. Breakdown. Okay, my workspace. Maybe I need to switch accounts. Now I have some like API over here, and what I'm going to do is no, no. Yeah. So, like we saw, a a scaled API actually has multiple routes. This API as well has multiple routes. If we go to app.js, we cannot test everything in this particular video. I gave you an essence of how to make some CRUD operations in this and how to actually work with environment and Postman, right? So hopefully that much information would be viable for you to learn on it. And now what we are going to do is we are just going to review different things and understand it, right? So this is one application that I'm working on. It has multiple routes, and I'm not going to expand any of this just so I do not expose something that is uh, confidential, right? So let's close. Yeah, let's close all the tabs. We do not need to work with any API now. And what we can see is this is a team space. This is a workspace known as Heo backend. So it is a backend for a software known as Heo, and it has multiple collaborators, right? Uh, One is me, another is another backend developer, then another is an application developer. So while I create the APIs, I test out those APIs using Postman. And this documentation, this proper arrangement also allows the application developer to review the different APIs that are in place and to integrate those APIs in the application while the development is in progress. So that is the use of team spaces. Although there is some cap, uh, you can only create a team space of maximum three people if you are on free basis. If you want to create a bigger team and manage that on Postman, you need to upgrade your plan. And I wouldn't recommend that if you are not working on a big production level application, right? Having three to four developers, you can just have the developers that are actually going to interact with the APIs in this team space, right? Let's go back. We do not need this. We saw team spaces. We already saw environments. And let's see what we can cover under the others section. So coming back, you can see there is some sort of documentation going on. So API documentation is something that is auto-generated for you. View documentation, right? So if I want to see the documentation of this thing, although I did not write anything myself, it will provide me all the information that is over there, right? It is going to have multiple routes inside of it. So for each route, it is going to generate and document for us to actually review or to share with somebody else. So what we can do is actually publish this and it will be available online. We can view collection which will just redirect us to this collection part, right? And yeah, that is it. So documentation is auto-generated for us. It is a long list of documentation based on the number of routes that we have, right? So once you have developed an API, you can auto-generate the documentation for it, and it will save your time. Yeah. So that would be one thing that I would like to cover under others. Then pre-request script. This is a section where you can actually write code in JavaScript format. Wait a second. We'll actually browse that. Test scripts in Postman using JavaScript. Yeah. So it is going to be like some sort of code. Maybe we can post that over here and maybe listen to that. Well. Yeah. So pre-request script was not something where you write the test scripts, but yeah, if you write the test script under the test section in JavaScript itself, it will check for the response header. So we have the response. One second. Over here. The response header is going to be over here. It is going to check and it is going to extract the status code that has come back from the uh, HTTP response, right? And while it was able to find the 200 status codes, as we can see over here, it was able to pass the test for us. So these are some topics that are actually relevant. You won't use everything in like full application, but hopefully I gave uh, a good overview of things. Right? With this, I will try to end this particular tutorial. If you like the tutorial, uh, please give it a like, share it with your friends. Let me know what improvements I can make. Although I can see there were some shortcomings, but yeah, hopefully if you stuck with the tutorial, you understood what I was trying to explain. Uh, yeah, that was the idea. If you want more such tutorial, or maybe if you want me to build such an application that uses authorization and there is a client application and React, then just let me know in the comments. I would be more than happy to go through those comments and actually work on a video specifically for React and then maybe make it a large scale project that can be on YouTube, right? So thank you very much for giving your time. Hopefully you learned. Uh, that is it. Sayonara. Bye bye.